Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a complete disassembly, maintenance, and reassembly of the Overture. It's a pretty typical construction to a lot of crossbar lock knives, so in addition to this knife, pretty much any crossbar lock that you have will come apart like this. So this video should be useful to not only you who have an Overture, but any typically constructed crossbar lock knife with omega springs rather than coil springs. The way the Overture is designed, we really wanted to make this easy for you all. We believe in the right to repair. So every single screw, including the clips, is a T8. That means to effectively take this knife apart, you really only need one tool, a T8 star bit. As far as maintenance goes, we are also going to use some knife pivot lube and some Loctite when we get everything back together. So let's just go ahead and get started. To start off, I usually like to take apart the clip first. That way I'm left with a knife that is perfectly symmetrical. And then for me, I'm just going to work my way from the clip side of the knife down. So we only have 2 body screws and a pivot screw on the Overture, so we're going to work through those first. We may not need to completely get that screw out of there, because as soon as we just loosen these up a little bit, we should be able to lift the scale right off. Now I'm going to put everything over on one side that belongs with one scale. I like keeping the 2 halves of the knives together. Over on one half of the knife, you can just see here it's a scale, and then the pivot collar, this one's black, the pivot screw, and then 2 body screws. And then revealed to us here, you have the construction of the Overture. Now you can see this one's a little bit dusty. I've been carrying around this one a lot. This one's my personal one. I'm going to go ahead and take apart the other side of the knife now. With some pocket knives, you'll notice that you might need 2 tools to take apart the pivot because they all just spin into each other. With this one, we did make sure that the pivot is keyed. It has a D-shaped pivot. That way it will lock in place within the liner, and you'll be able to spin around the pivot screw independently regardless of which side you're coming from. And right here is ultimately the skeletonized frame of the Overture. Honestly, it looks pretty cool as it is. I know you see me opening and closing it like this when it's disassembled like this. You got to be really careful if you're going to do that, because if your finger slips into that weight reduction hole, that puts your finger in the path of the blade potentially, depending on how small your fingers are. So just be really careful. Treat it like it can cut you, because it can. At this point, what I prefer to do is to remove the omega springs and the actual crossbar from the knife itself. You can see right there that there's just a little slip that goes down here where the crossbar can slip out, and we have just one hole for the omega springs. It's not adjustable, but we really like the retention that this spring has all on its own. So to take that out, you simply pull it down. And then once you get to that point, there's enough space for that crossbar lock to come out. You might need to grab your nail and simply lift that spring. You can see that it comes out no problem. That just fell, that was the actual pivot, it looks like. So the blade's going to freely come out now. There's the pivot right here. You can see as soon as there was no more tension on that blade, the blade wants to come out. So do be careful of that. Definitely don't want anybody getting hurt as they're taking apart their knife. And so I personally like to leave the omega springs attached to the crossbar. They can be a little bit finicky to get back on. If they do pop off, there's no problem. You can just slip them back on fairly easily, but there's not really a huge benefit in taking them apart. So once I have those 2 springs lifted off from that hole right there, I like to just snake it through. That is going to be one con, I guess, to leaving them on, is that the liner might not come apart super cleanly, because you kind of have to work around that spring as you take it apart. But just a little rearranging and maneuvering will get that out just fine. I'm going to go ahead and leave the crossbar and the 2 omega springs right over there. And then let's see, I don't want to mix up my liners. So you can see that's the stop pin still stuck in the liner there. So the construction usually goes like this, which means this liner belongs over here with this half, and this one belongs over here. Now, the knife at this point is pretty much completely disassembled. Like I said, you could remove the springs from the crossbar lock. You can also remove the thumb studs if you really want to clean that out. They are T8 as well, so again, only one tool no problems there. And this is going to be one of the biggest perks to taking apart the knife completely, is that you'll be able to really clean off that liner. You can see it's a little bit dusty, it's a little bit smudgy, especially on that backside there. And so we're going to clean that off really well, and then we'll get it all put back together, and it should be good as new. One thing that you can also utilize when you are disassembling and maintaining your knife is the pouch that comes with your knife. In every Overture, we include this little microfiber pouch that your knife comes in, and you can simply use that to clean it off. You know, I don't have any gunk that's super stuck on there, so it's coming off pretty well. It's just a microfiber pouch. It'll grab some of that dust, get some of those fingerprints, some of that oil off, and polish up your liner just like new. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with both pieces. It looks like that stop pin is still stuck in there, so I'm going to take that out. Don't want to lose it. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these body screws right here and poke it through. Thankfully that didn't go too far. It did fly off my mat a little bit though. Be careful, again, things can get everywhere. If something falls on the ground, something like this tiny, it may not be very easy to find, so we definitely want to keep track of all of those things. You'll notice also what came off with the blade here was our two brass caged ceramic ball bearings. There's one of those that goes on each side of the blade. We'll make sure to get all of those cleaned up before we reassemble the knife as well. But at this point, I'm just cleaning off the liners. There we go. Nice and shiny, nice and polished. I'm going to move on to the blade now. Now, if you're uncomfortable with handling the blade completely disassembled like this and you want to give yourself a little bit more peace of mind, some people will put some painter's tape over that edge just to protect your fingers a little bit. If you are at all uneasy, I would definitely recommend doing that. Now, there's a good chance if you're taking apart your knife, you feel a little bit more confident than some others may, but just remember to be careful. Like I said earlier, it is a knife. It can cut you. It will cut you if you're not responsible with it. So I'm going to hold the spine of the blade here and just wipe off that blade a little bit. I'm going to grab the other side so I can wipe off where the bearings go, because this is the part of the blade that we really can't access during normal daily use. So I want to take advantage of the opportunity and clean it out really well. Also right here, I didn't mention this before, this is our back spacer, and it does come with two screws in there. When I disassembled mine, it looks like the screws stayed in there. I'm going to go ahead and leave them just so they're a little bit easier to pop back into place once I'm reassembling the knife. Now this is an additional step that you might not necessarily need. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of this lubricant to the entire scale itself, not just the part where the pivot goes. This is just going to be to kind of keep it a little bit clean and oil it up a little bit. You can see I didn't put a whole lot on there. Just 3 tiny little dots, and that may even be more than I need. Again, I'm going to grab my microfiber pouch and just kind of rub that all over the liner. Again, this is just in the interest of keeping it nice and polished, and rubbing some oil around this metal will help the corrosion resistance a little bit more. Keep your knife dry if you can. If you use your knife and it gets a little bit wet, make sure you dry it off. And if you need to disassemble it a little bit to clean off the knife properly, then make sure you do that. We are absolutely not going to dismiss our warranty for you just because you wanted to disassemble your knife. We no longer own it. You do. It is yours to do with what you please. And feel free to ask any questions as well. We're happy to answer any questions you'd like as far as any part of disassembly, cleaning, reassembly, knife maintenance. We're definitely here to help you out. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how clean everything is at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and reassemble the knife. It's going to be easiest to disregard the scales and put those on at the very end. You are going to need to have the scales off of the knife to be able to access that lane for the crossbar and the springs to go back together. I'm going to go ahead and put on that stop pin. Then I'm going to go ahead and add on this backspacer. And actually, something I'll point out, I'm going to go ahead and take these backspacer screws out. Now, our backspacer is also keyed. There is a flat spot to those holes. There's a flat spot in the body of the screw as well. So just make sure when you are assembling that you put it together the right way. There is not necessarily a flat part in the liner for this part of the knife. So what I like to do personally is put the screws in the backspacer Once I kind of have that all set together, then I like to set the backspacer on the liner. You can kind of push it around a little bit, and you will eventually feel this kind of click or this snap of those screws going into place. So that's where it's supposed to sit right there. Next up, I'm going to grab the pivot. Now, again, like I said, the pivot is D-shaped. That's what made it so easy to take apart. That also means it has to go back together a certain way though. Now on the clip side, the liner is not going to be keyed at all. On the show side, that liner is going to have that D shape that matches the pivot. So when you put this in there for now, just remember that you might have to spin that a little bit to help you line it up with this later on. Now I'm going to leave this part of the liner as it is for a little bit, and I'm going to work on reassembling the blade portion with the bearings. Now I say reassemble, there's not really anything you have to like screw together or pop into place with these bearings, but they will sit very naturally within the hole in the blade here, especially once you add a little bit of oil. Now, as far as which way you put these bearings back into the blade, let me show you here. There are two different sides. I'll put them side by side here so you can kind of see the difference. So if you look really closely, you can see that the bearing is only open on one side and it's closed on the other. So right here, it's open. You can kind of see the space between each bearing, between each ball. But then this one, you can see if it's turned the other way, that you can't see any space between the balls there. It is the smooth, the more aesthetically pleasing side of the bearing, I think. I want to put that more finished, flush side against the blade. Now, while I still have the bearings right here, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of lubricant to my blade. And I'm going to put that again with that smooth side facing down. And because of that oil, it should stay there a little bit. If I turn it over, it's not going to immediately fall out. Now, if you hit it against something, if you start shaking this around, it is going to go somewhere. So make sure you're careful. Put a little oil on that side. Then I will do the same thing with this bearing. Place it right there. Before I put the blade on there, I'm actually also going to add a little bit of oil to this part of the liner where the bearing will sit. Again, you want to be very careful. Remember not to put too much pressure on that edge. You don't want to get cut. There you go. And I just let the blade bend a little bit. It looks like my backspacer popped off a bit. That's no problem. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the other side of the liner back on top. Actually, what I am going to do, I'm going to move this over a little bit. That way the knife can be propped up and not on a completely flat surface. And again, even for someone who regularly takes blades apart like myself, this can be a little bit finicky. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to rest my finger on the back side of that pivot there. That way it's not going to slide out. Then I'm going to make sure that my blade still has the bearings on either side. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. Very carefully transition it to my other hand. Now, before I put that top liner on, I'm going to put some oil on this side of the bearing as well. And we're just going to slide that right in there. Looks like it's seated into the backspacer. Now, I think the part that's giving me the most trouble is the stop pin. Okay, so it took a little bit, but I did get the stop pin to sit back in there. If you remember when we took the knife apart originally, that stop pin was stuck in there. And that's not a bad thing. You want that tolerance to be really tight. That way when your blade opens, there's no play or lock rock. I did set myself back a little bit here, so I'm going to reassemble the backspacer pieces. There we go. Drag the blade with the two bearings and the pivot over into place. There we go. Okay, that feels better already. There we go. Did you guys hear that click a little bit? That was that stop pin finally clicking into place in both liners. Like I said, it's definitely a little bit tricky. It's not the most straightforward thing, so just make sure you have a little bit of patience and don't try to force anything into place. If you're ever in doubt, just back up a few steps, take a closer look. There's no shame in taking something back apart that you already put back together, just to make sure that you have a clear idea as to what is going on. Now, at this point, the frame of the knife is put together pretty well. You do still have the pivot itself. The pivot tube is going to be loose right there. So make sure that doesn't slide too far out one way or the other. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Omega springs and the crossbar, and actually now that I'm looking at it, that crossbar itself is a little bit dirty, so I'm going to clean that off a bit. Now the way these Omega springs are held onto the crossbar is with this little hook shape. I don't know how well you can see, but right, let me get the camera to focus here. There's a little opening within the crossbar, and that leaves room for that wire, for that spring to kind of wrap around and grab it. And it should not be something that just freely comes apart. You know, you can see this entire time I've been messing with it, the crossbar and these two springs have stayed together very well. Now, when the crossbar goes back into place, the springs go down and away from the crossbar rather than towards the tip of the knife. You want to make sure you're putting things in the right way. Now, I'm going to rotate these opposite directions with one another. And kind of like we got it out, I'm going to snake that spring back through a little bit. Okay, so I went ahead and picked the knife up. Now, remember, I'm holding it by the pivot. That way the whole thing doesn't come apart on me. Just so it's easier for you to see. It'll probably be easier for you to do this sitting on the table, but I want to make sure that it's clear and easy for you guys to understand this. Now I'm simply going to drop this back spring. Going to weave that through the hole. And there it is through the other side. Again, a little bit finicky, but once you do this once or twice, you'll really understand exactly how they work, and it won't be a problem next time you do it. Now what you want to do next, once you have the two springs in here, you can see they're on either side of the frame. You can see my backspacer fell out. That's no problem. We can put that back in here in a minute. You want to slide the crossbar up and into its locked position. That's how the knife sits when it is open and when it is shut. That is where it has the most tension here. Now you can see there's a little bit of a hole right there. That is where the peg from that Omega spring sits into. So for me, the easiest way that I find to do this is to put that peg on top of the liner. Once I have it seated there, I'm going to take my fingernail and I just kind of put a little bit of stress on the spring, bending it into place, and then it will snap into that hole right there. There you go, got it on one side. I'm going to turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. Again, this entire time I'm making sure that the pivot does not slide through one way or the other. That would be very unfortunate to have to go back to that portion again. Like I said, do the same thing on the other side. Be careful with that blade. You don't want to cut yourself. You can just kind of bend it as you slide it over. And there you go. Now, you can rest easy a little bit once you get to this stage because the tension on that crossbar lock is going to keep the blade in place. The blade is locked open right now. So even though the knife is not completely reassembled, nothing is screwed together, that tension is keeping the knife open. You can see I'm bending it right here and nothing is happening, nothing is closing. Now, I did mention earlier that we lost our backspacers a little bit. That's no problem. There's plenty of room here to pry that open a little bit, and we can slide those back into place. It won't be as easy as it was the first time, but once it's in there, it really shouldn't come apart, like I said, especially now that there is tension on that lock. So I'm just going to pry this open a little bit, pry open that liner. Like I said, you can see the opening right there where the backspacer belongs. I'm going to go ahead and slide the backspacer, and I'm not really lifting it up a whole lot because I don't want those barrel spacers to come out. I'm going to slide up that backspacer very carefully, kind of bring it into place here. So I lift it up. There we go. Both of the barrel spacers are clear. I'm going to use my driver to move it around a little bit. I'm going to be very slow and very careful. And once I line up those barrel spacers with those holes, back spacers should, there we go, snap right back into place. So now you can see right there, our backspacer is reassembled, and essentially your knife is completely reassembled at this point. Looks like the pivot screw was magnetized a little bit. It was sticking to the blade there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble the scales of the knife. This is going to be the easiest part. Now, this is a good opportunity to take one more look at your knife before you're covering everything up. If you need to add any more oil, which I may do because I was handling the knife a little bit more than I initially intended, it's going to be most important around where the pivot is. And then if you got any more dust or lint or hair or anything on the knife like that, you are going to want to make sure you wipe that off one more time before you finish the reassembly. So like I said, I'm just going to put a little bit of oil around the pivot. Now, like the bearing, the pivot collar has two different sides. There's one that is a little bit more open, and then there's one that's more flush along the entire surface. You want that flush side to go down into the scale, because that open side is what leaves room for the pivot screw to go in. I'm going to start with the show side of the knife. At this point, it really doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that's lined up nicely. Now, for peace of mind, I'm going to go ahead and put the pivot screw in first, just so I know that that part of the knife is assembled and is not going to come apart on me. There you go. See it perfectly flush now. And we'll be able to get that other side in. Just turning that around. Putting that pivot collar in the right way. And you will be able to put that in right. There you go, perfect, right away. Now I didn't seat down either side super tight, which means there is going to be a little bit of blade play, and that is okay. We will fix that later. I'm just going to go ahead and get all these body screws put back together now. Now, some people will tell you to put Loctite on every screw. Some people will tell you not to put Loctite on any screw. If you're not going to regularly disassemble your knife, it might be a good idea to put a little bit of blue Loctite on your body screws. But your body screws are also not what is seeing a whole lot of action on a daily basis. When you open and close your knife, you are opening it and closing it around the pivot. And so I personally don't put a whole lot of Loctite on the body screws. Now, when you get your knife brand new, there is going to be a little bit of Loctite on those screws. And I forgot to mention that at the beginning. The first time you disassemble your knife, you're going to feel a little bit of tension when you're trying to loosen those screws. That is okay. There is a little bit of Loctite put on every single screw. If you just firmly press and just turn a little bit tightly, a little bit slowly, you'll feel a little bit of a snap, and that is that Loctite breaking. Don't feel like you damaged your knife or anything when you get to that point. That should be normal, but that's that blue Loctite just breaking its initial seal. Like I said, I am not necessarily going to put Loctite back on the body screw at the moment. So I get all four of those put back together. There we go. So now I have all 6 of the screws of the knife, the 2 pivot screws and the 4 body screws all put back together. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close the knife just so I can mess with these body screws with a little bit more of a safe interaction. Now I am going to push decently hard here. Do not over tighten your body screws. Again, these are T8s, they're not T6s, so they really should not strip as easily as maybe some other knives that you do have, but you still don't want to apply too much pressure. You don't want to abuse your tools. You don't want to damage anything here. So I'm going to tighten those, and as soon as you feel resistance, you're good to stop. These screws aren't going to come flying out, going across the room in normal use just because you didn't tighten them as much as you possibly could. Now here is where the specific part comes in a little bit. You want to make sure that you do not have any blade play with your knife. Now, where I am going to apply a little bit of Loctite is in this pivot screw. I know we just put this all back together, but I am going to disassemble this pivot screw again a little bit. I'm just going to do one at a time so we're not taking the knife completely apart again. I'm going to grab this blue Loctite here, and what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of Loctite around the thread of that screw. So you can kind of rotate the threads through there a little bit. Again, you want blue Loctite, not red Loctite. There you go. So I got a little bit much, but that's going to be just fine. I'm going to go ahead and put that back together. Again, I'm not going to seat it in as tight as it possibly goes. We're going to wait a little bit and then we're going to tune the knife. And you don't have to have the blade open like I do here. In fact, I would recommend closing it. Now I'm going to take off the screw on the other side and add a little bit of Loctite to this screw as well. There you go. You really just need a little bit. As soon as you see some of that blue on that thread, you are going to be good enough to go. All right, now this is where tuning your knife is going to come into play. Now I can feel as I'm opening that is really tight. I bet, yeah, there's not really any blade play right now, but I bet I have a hard time. Yeah, I can still flick it out, but not as quickly as you usually can. And you can't really get it to fall shut at this point. So that's going to be a secure knife. If you want your knife to actuate that way, you know, you're not going to have any blade play and you're going to be okay. I like to have a little bit more freedom of movement with my knife. So I'm going to loosen one of these screws just a little bit. And sometimes you might find that one of them is a little bit more screwed in than the other. I like to make them as evenly flush as I can. You don't want to completely shove one screw in really far and the other one in, not at all. So I'm going to back this screw out just a little bit. And actually for me personally, I find it a little bit easier to open and shut the knife with the clip in place, at least with one hand. So I am going to go ahead and put that on there. Again, I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to put any Loctite on these screws either. I find it easiest to put the screws in the clip and then hold the tail of the clip here, kind of like a ramp, and it'll keep the screws suspended. Try to show you from the side here a little bit. There you go, like that. I like to hold the clip up in place like this. And then I put the knife completely flat on the surface of the table. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find one of those screws with my driver here. That way I can kind of drop the screws slowly in place. And again, I'm just going to tighten it a little bit. That way I can pick it up without them moving like crazy. And then I'm going to do the rest of the tightening with the knife completely in my hand. I just think it's a little bit easier to grab it that way. Now, just like with all these other screws, as soon as you feel some resistance, you need to be done. You don't want to over tighten these. You don't want to damage the threads. You don't want to damage the actual bit that you're using or the screw head itself. That pocket clip is perfectly secure. It's not going to go anywhere. Now, let's go back to the pivot. I like the way that opens up. I like the way that drops shut. I don't see any blade play here. Now what you're going to want to do is adjust this to your taste. I personally really like drop shut action, where it's very easy to shut and open the knife, and I don't want any blade play. You're going to want to prioritize making sure you don't have any blade play. Your knife will eventually wear in, especially with all that oil that you put in there. Now, I'm happy with mine. It doesn't have any blade play. It flips open and it drops shut very easily. Now this is going to be the most difficult part of the reassembly process. Leave your knife alone. I know you just cleaned it up, you're going to want to carry it around, but because you put Loctite on that pivot, the best way to make sure that Loctite stays useful is to not touch your knife for about a day or so. That is going to give time for the Loctite to harden up, and what it's going to do is it's going to keep that pivot at the tightness level that you set it to. It's not going to be perfect. It will loosen up gradually over time, but the best way to get long-standing, consistent tightness in that pivot is to put a little bit of Loctite like we did in there and leave it as it is, and it should be just fine. Now, I know that was a bit of a complex process here. Like I said, crossbar lock is not the most straightforward. It's not the easiest locking mechanism, pocket knife to take apart, but that is how you take apart a crossbar lock knife, particularly the Overture in this case. If you like this knife, feel free to head on over to truelinecompany.com. We've got the Overture for sale in 3 different versions. This is a slate gray G10 with a stonewash blade. We also have red aluminum with that same stonewash, and then we have a green linen micarta with a black blade on that one. some gold accents there with the pivot collar and the backspacer. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to us on Instagram. You can follow us anywhere online at Trueline Company. That's YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, anywhere you go. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out a lot. We really want to be very educational with the content that we put out and help you guys get the best use out of your tools. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.